Welcome, everyone. My name is Julia, and I am a career coach and strategist with over 10 years of experience helping ambitious professionals like you find clarity in who you are and helping you align your values and preferences to your career. This podcast is one of the main ways that I share my knowledge, strategies, and experience with you. And if you check out the podcast page on my website, I have all of the seasons organized and easily accessible to find what you need. Along with this podcast, I also have multiple courses, resources, and I offer one-on-one customized career coaching covering career exploration, career management, and career advancement. You can head over to ridethetidecollective.com to check it all out. This season is all about controlling your career, and I am sharing the process that I created to help get you started on controlling your career. This episode is going to be going over one of my favorite topics, which is identity analysis, and you will explore and articulate who you are through assessments and self-reflection activities to enhance your self-awareness. Now, obviously, for the purposes of the podcast, I'm going to be giving you an overview of some of the resources that I use and why I use them. And I'll also provide some resources that are accessible to you right now for free. So in over the 10 years that I have been a career coach, there are a lot of resources out there to help people figure out things like their personality, their preferences, and even what career path they should go down. I have used quite a few of these resources, and to be transparent, there are many I haven't used because they don't always align with the work that I do. The assessments that I recommend to everyone pretty much, and the specific assessments that are in my program, I have either used personally, I have used personally, and I use with clients very, very regularly. And in some cases, I actually have formal training to administer these assessments as well. So it's worth noting that I do use assessments as a starting point for conversations. There is no perfect assessment that's going to do everything that you want it to do. That's why I use multiple. I've seen the positive impact of combining these assessments together, and the conversation and clarity that has resulted from my clients, and honestly from myself as well, it has been absolutely worth it. So when you start talking about who you are and making career decisions, there are 4 things that need to be considered: your skills, your interests, your values, and your personality. I have specific activities and resources I use for each of these, but let's talk generally about each one, and I'll also let you know what I use and why I use it. So let's start with one of my favorite assessments, and that is values. In my formal program, I actually send out a box of cards that you sort through to determine your values, but I also have a values assessment available for free on my website, so I will link that into the blog post for this episode if you'd like to do this yourself. This is one of my favorite assessments because it tells you what you value in this season. The values assessment is one that I recommend to all of my clients. It is one of the free resources that I push to anyone that contacts me, because anytime that there is a big life change or career change, you have to make sure that your values still align with your situation. So this assessment and the information it gives you becomes a cornerstone. And for me, it's a cornerstone to most of my coaching programs because it's the filter that you use when you are making decisions. Once you figure out your values and what you need to make decisions, you now want to consider your interests. And in the career world, we sometimes use what is called the Holland Code to help determine interests or interest areas. These are 6 interest areas that are collectively called the RISEC, which is basically the first letter of each of the interest areas. Original, I know. But it stands for realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. Each of these areas outlines traits, career options, and environments that would be ideal for someone with that interest area. In the traditional assessment, you can identify up to 3 Holland Code areas and then use a resource like ONET Online to do a search of careers. I find Holland Code and ONET most helpful for people who are generally more earlier in their career and they're looking for different options. In some cases, people who feel misaligned with their career or they were pushed into a career that they don't really like and they want to see if it really aligns with who they are. And then also for people who are looking for adjacent careers, because one thing that ONET does is it gives you careers that are similar to the one that you might already have or you might be interested in. So many people can look at the RISEC area breakdowns and choose which aligns best. And that's what I recommend for you. So I'll leave a couple resources and links into the blog page so that you can do a little bit more research on that. But that's one of the main ways that I help people determine interest. Aside from that, I do a lot of question asking. That is another way that we determine interest. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I go to pretty regularly that I think helps people figure out, is this an area I'd want to work in, or is this just something I enjoy, is think about the products and the things that you use on a daily basis, and would you be interested in working for an organization that aligns with that? So a lot of people have Apple products, for example. Would you want to work for Apple in a corporate environment? Does that align with the functional area that you're in? Are there options for that? One example I've shared multiple times is I'm really interested in makeup. And I actually looked at one point in time for different makeup companies that were around me that I was really into. One of them was headquartered in the Midwest, and I didn't want to live in the Midwest, so I ruled that out, right? My value was staying close, it was location. So because of that value, it ruled out that company. Now I did find another company that was closer, that was a company that I really enjoyed their makeup products. At the time, I didn't want to make a switch, so I didn't go for it, but it was good for me to do that research to determine if that was something that I'd be really interested in. So don't discount just your general interests in life. There are usually companies and organizations that are connected to that as well. But the Holland Code and ONET, that's a more formal way to provide some additional information, and then also statistics, skills, all of that around those different careers. So now we're on to skills. While this type of assessment might seem straightforward, it can also take a lot of time to think about what you're really good at, what you love doing, and where you'd like to see growth. And most importantly, what do you hate doing, right? So when we discuss skills, the one area you need to be most aware of are your killer skills. I really wish that had a different name, but it is what it is. But these are basically skills that you excel at, but you don't like doing or you don't want to do anymore. So for example, when I transitioned my career path in my 20s, I used my graphic design and marketing skills in the transition because it was a skill set that many coaches did not have. So I could fulfill multiple roles within my department. Later in my career, when I was more established as a career coach and a leader, I didn't market those creative skills anymore in that way. I didn't want to use them. I didn't want them to be something that people hired me for anymore. And they had really become a killer skill in that particular season of my career. And I wanted to focus on strategy and leadership in my next role. Okay, so think about the skills that you really love. Make sure that you are approaching careers around those skills. So let's talk about skill levels for a moment. What I just described in my career is something that I'm seeing with current clients as well. And it's the shift from develop and execute to strategy, management, and leadership. And this tends to happen in your mid-career. These are different skill sets and they need to be articulated in different ways. So if you're leveling up into leadership focused positions, make sure that you're shifting your language on your resume and in your interviews to reflect the skills needed for those roles. Okay. This is very, very important. And I think a lot of mid-career people get hung up on the language. They stick with this really execution oriented language throughout everything, and they don't make that switch. So make sure that if you are wanting to go into more of a leadership position, more into strategy, you have to go through and really shift that language. And then you also have to shift it internally for yourself to make sure that you are leveling yourself up in your own brain. One assessment I use that aligns with both skills and personality is the Gallup Strengths Assessment. I have been using this assessment for over 12 years and I love it. It is one of my favorites. I love positive psychology, and this assessment is a reflection of that practice. As a new professional, I took this assessment at a time when I really doubted myself and I doubted what I brought to the table as an employee. There was a lot of imposter syndrome, especially because I switched functional areas and industries. And this assessment gave me descriptive, positive language about myself and how I operate in the world and at work. So if this is an assessment that you would like to explore independently, I highly, highly recommend the book Strengths and Leadership by Tom Rath. I will also link it into the blog post, but this book not only gives you a code to take the assessment if you haven't taken it already, but it also covers leadership quadrants and it helps you categorize your strengths into, I think, a more useful pattern. This was also an assessment that helped me curb a lot of negative language around where I thought my strengths lied. So a lot of things that past managers had told me were not what they wanted from me, things that they didn't deem to be strengths, I actually found out were strengths. So it also helped me reframe in my mind how I viewed myself. And I was able to really change a lot of negative language that I had developed around myself because of how other people saw me and what they valued as strengths. So again, if you're in this similar situation, highly, highly recommend this assessment. And if you can talk to someone like me or somebody who is certified in strengths, I would recommend it because the conversation around it is really, really wonderful when you embrace it. All right, another assessment that I have been exploring more and that is also added into my formal program is the Enneagram. And I added this one into the mix because I just really like the descriptions and the breakdowns that it uses. It resonated with me when I took it. I've had many, many colleagues who have used it and clients as well who've used it before they got to me. And I think it works. I think it provides different language than some of the other assessments that we have. Is it my favorite assessment for career development? Not really, but again, it gives really wonderful language to help people describe themselves, and it sounds different than strengths and it sounds different than MBTI, which I'll talk about in a minute. But having that language, that's what I'm after, and that's one of the main goals of controlling your career is knowing how to talk about yourself, knowing how to articulate who you are. And I think that that assessment really adds some wonderful language in there for you. Finally, the assessment I recommend most often for career development is the MBTI Step 2 or the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Most people are familiar with the 4-letter result that you get from traditional MBTI assessment, which for most people isn't enough. I've spoken to more than a few clients that really don't like being put into that box, and I absolutely get it. That's why I recommend Step 2, and I use Step 2 only at this point. It breaks down your results for each dichotomy into what the assessment calls facets. So these are a deeper description for each letter on the assessment. So for example, let's say you get the extrovert result when you take the assessment, but you've always resonated with some of the introversion descriptions, right? Maybe you're having a hard time choosing, or you see yourself on both sides in different situations. What step 2 will do is it will show you where you might have more introverted tendencies that make you feel that way. So the report for this assessment is absolutely one of my favorites. It provides so much detail, so much information, and the language that it gives you, it's amazing. Like, it will help you definitely solidify your professional articulation of yourself. I know that there are people out there who don't use assessments or don't care for the ones that I recommend, and that's okay. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. And I use these assessments because they are a starting point. I have seen them transform how people view themselves, how they describe who they are. I've seen them take clients from doubting themselves to being confident about their skills and their abilities because they had clear language. So, can we get that through coaching? Of course, absolutely we can. But an assessment cuts down the time and the monetary investment by giving us language to start with, okay? All right. Whew. I know this is a lot of information to take in and to process, but it's necessary. When you are trying to take control of your situation, it requires this level of exploration, and this phase is packed with it. In my program, this is one of the longest phases because of all the information that we need to cover and the impact that it can have. While learning to articulate yourself is amazing and absolutely needed, it can also be very exhausting because for some of you, you need to unlearn your thoughts and beliefs that you've had about yourself that were rooted in someone else's assessment of you. So if you're diving into this journey on your own, I recommend taking time for this phase to allow everything to sink in and to process positively. It will absolutely take time. It will absolutely take time for you to get through it, but it's worth it. And here's the thing too, not everybody needs this level of depth. Some people can articulate themselves really well. Sometimes what these assessments do is they solidify what you already believe about yourself and maybe give you some additional language to use that can really just tighten up how you're already describing yourself. So you might want to consider that as well if there's some doubt that's creeping in for you as a professional. All right, as I have said in the past, these episodes are going to be packed with action, and I know I've given you a lot of resources just in what I use for assessments. You're welcome to go out and utilize those assessments if you'd like. But the specific action for this episode is to download the values resource that I have on my website, and I'll link it into the blog post for you. It's free. I believe it's the best starting point for most people. And if you really want to go the extra mile, look into using ONET Online or BLS.gov to explore their website. There's a lot of information and resources that will help you explore various aspects of your career and possible future paths. One thing I will say is ONET is not going to have every single functional area, okay? Especially newer tech, it's not going to have a lot of that because it takes time for them to update those descriptions and all of that. So you have to go into it with a grain of salt in that way. But you can also look at the different types of careers that might align and make some inferences for your own career path or your industry and what might make the most sense for you. So I do want to put that in there. The other thing that I wanted to let you know is if you are interested in MBTI Step 2, this is a coaching resource that I offer that is independent from Control Your Career. It's one of the few options that I have that includes an assessment, and it's called the Clarity of Self coaching course and coaching, because I do have some videos for you to watch. And then we do a 90-minute coaching session once you've taken the assessment and done some self-reflection. 90 minutes is a long time. We can get a lot done in that period of time. But I think if you're in a place where you would like to do some articulation, but you don't want to dive into a more in-depth program like Control Your Career, the Clarity of Self is something that I highly recommend. So I will also link that down into the blog post. So thank you for listening. And if you have made it all the way into the end of this episode, I really appreciate you. Please follow Ride the Tide Collective on social media. I have been primarily hanging out on LinkedIn these days, so definitely look that up. Again, I will leave the link in the blog post for this episode, but I will see you next time.